and welcome to another mini course of Mindfulness and Money. I'm Rhiannon. I am the founder of Conscious Economics.
And I'm Asil, the financial therapist at Conscious Economics.
Today, we are going to be taking you through a mini course on aligning your personal values with your financial decision making.
Another way to refer to that is having wealth with purpose. So what is this all about? We're going to specifically focus on the lens of women, although the advice and the knowledge that we're going to share is really applicable to all genders.
100%. But I think particularly right now, as women are starting to become more empowered within the economy, and we are on the precipice of great change in the Canadian economy with what is being called the women's wealth transfer. So in the next couple of years, we are going to see the largest crossover of wealth into the hands of women that we have ever seen in history. So this is why we're really specifically interested in helping women understand how to align their personal values and goals with their wealth so that they can become better, more savvy spenders, savers, earners, and investors.
Absolutely. So when we talk about alignment of value, money at its core is neutral. It doesn't have meaning unless we attribute the meaning and the values we have for it. Rhiannon and I always reflect on the fact that the relationship we have with money is a reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves. So there's so much more to money than what it is at face value.
So I think the first question that we may all need a little bit of help with, Asil, is how do we even start by identifying what our core values are?
Absolutely.
And then how do those align to finances?
There's a lot of different activities out there that you can find online to even understand what your values are. Sometimes you need to print a whole list of values and start evaluating them. You can start by circling all the ones that automatically draw your attention and continue narrowing it down by having some values compete with one another. So for example, if I love adventure, but I also love family, and both are important priorities for me, I would then put them in front of each other and say, which one takes more precedent? And when you do that, you narrow it down to at least understand your top 5 values. It's important to do that because when things compete, such as life, it's important for you to get anchored back into what matters to you the most, because they're going to be the guideline and the GPS for your decision making.
Yes.
Sometimes I help clients understand their values in order to kind of customize their own decision tree. Clients come and say, like, how do I know what I need to spend money on? Or how do I know what career choice to make when I'm given 2 different offers? And when we have our own customized decision tree, we filter these choices through it in such a way that gives us this output that's aligned with our own values. And I love doing that with clients because it really helps them feel personalized and engaged in how they make their decisions based on what matters for them.
I love that. And I think that in just starting out, when we're talking about money, we're talking about financial decision making, and we're starting with values, that is a very fresh perspective.
Yeah.
And most of us don't even have the core values. Never mind thinking about in relation to money. We don't know what our core values are.
Yeah.
We think we maybe know, but we haven't spent the time to do the exercise.
Yeah. So there's different exercises, like I said, out there, and in the workbook attached to this particular module, you can download it and look up how to figure out your top values. But the second part of it is now looking at your cash flow and making sure that it's aligned with your values. Because sometimes when there's incongruency with that, that's particularly when we experience unfulfillment, impulsive spending, and just overall dysfunctional behaviors with money, be it debt or other particular issues that require attention. So it's important to make sure that our values are aligned with our finances. But what do we really mean when we say that? One way to figure that out, and I do this with my clients as well, is we look at your bank statement, your credit card statement, and we assign a value for each of the spending categories that we find on that particular statement. So for example, if I have a gym membership, that's aligned with my health value. When I take my son to some activities, that is my family bonding time. When I go out with my friends to socialize and spend some money there, that's my connection value and community and connection. So there's different, when I'm spending money on like nails and hair, that's the value of beauty. So I can go through the ways I spend my money and literally calculate how much money am I spending on family, health, community, philanthropy, growth, all these different values that mean to me. And if my statement reflects my values and reflects how I prioritize them, that means I'm living in alignment with them. But if there's a big disconnect between how I'm spending my money and what matters to me, that's essentially what we need to reflect on and see where these changes need to take place.
And I love that exercise, Asil, because doing the reverse of even before you may be fully aware of what you think your values are, looking at those spending categories, you can start to infer statements based on them. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that in my last month's statement, I spent $300 on beauty and I spent $100 on family. I will infer based on that spending, I value beauty more than time with my family. Now, does that resonate for me? The answer would be no. But my spending is reflecting that. And so this is exactly why it's easy sometimes to see that we get out of alignment. And why does that happen? Why are we getting out of alignment with our core values in the ways that we're spending our money? And I think that comes down to just how much we are being bombarded with advertising, marketing, sales. It used to be that when you watch television, it was commercials and then you'd go outside and maybe some billboards. Now we've got it in our pocket.
No, but that's a really good point. And another thing on that is sometimes once we know exactly the category that's going out of alignment, for example, let's say I'm overspending on Uber Eats and I'm looking at the values that I have, and let's say community and connection is a big part, but there's not much on my spending that's suggesting that I'm actually living in alignment with that value. That just suggests that, let's say I'm feeling lonely and isolated, and because of that, these uncomfortable emotions that now I need distractions from are leading to impulsive decisions such as ordering Uber Eats or ordering more things on Amazon that I don't need. And these particular impulsive behaviors tend to surface, tend to be magnified, the more uncomfortable emotions in our life exist that we're looking to cope with. Grief, stress, sometimes even excitement and joy. It's not always just uncomfortable emotions. So it's important to now identify the emotional triggers that are underlying these behaviors so that you can understand how are you using money as a way to process emotion, express it, and cope with it when it's uncomfortable.
100%. So let's maybe explore some of those emotional triggers and underlayers that many people and women in particular are experiencing.
So what's interesting, when I was doing some research about that, women actually have a bias called delayed discounting bias. And what that specific one means is they're susceptible to fear more than men are, specifically around financial decisions, in such a way where they would choose a short-term reward over delayed gratification. So in any given scenario, let's say an investment decision where you either take, let's say, 5% today or 10% in a month. If there's fear invoked in a particular situation, women will go for the 5% today over the 10% in a month because they prefer short-term returns because fear is involved, and that's the delayed discounting bias.
Yes.
What's interesting about that is men, on the other hand, are exposed to something called emotional spillover effect. So when men have emotions that are triggered in an unrelated event, let's say they're experiencing a lot of stress with work or stress because of a health concern, for example, the spillover effect of that will impact their decision making and make it less rational than the impact that particular spillover would have on women. So overall, like when I was in the financial world and I was formerly a financial planner, I always heard and was engaged in studies how women tend to be better investors than men, actually, because they had a better grasp on risk, and men sometimes tend to be more risky and engage in overconfidence and just go after risk in much more impulsive ways than women do, who are more emotionally regulated and controlled. But I feel like fear specifically plays a different role here and the impact of it on women tends to be higher.
I think this also comes down to a conversation that you and I have a lot around just the nature of our current economic system, and that fear isn't just about, oh my goodness, I'm afraid I'm not going to get that return, in a few months. Fear is also, oh my goodness, I'm afraid that I'm not pretty enough. I'm afraid that if I don't actually spend on this new hair trend or get this new outfit, I may lose my partner, or something might come up, like I'm not going to be able to, attract the kind of job that I want or the kind of friendships I want if I don't fit in, if I don't look this way. And we're in a culture now of constant comparison. We're in a culture of what is currently called financial dysmorphia, which is one of the many challenges that are coming up impacting women in today's economy. Financial dysmorphia being, I'm sure we've all heard of body dysmorphia, where you are distorted in your perception of what your body actually looks like. And now we're seeing this in women.
Financial aspects,
where we're distorted on how much money it takes in order to live a lifestyle that we seem to want.
Yeah, and how much money we need to make, how much net worth we need to have before we start experiencing comfort and happiness, and all these very distorted sense of that, social media being a big contributor to what that is.
Yeah, and so we're at a stage right now where we are having this collective awareness start to form around just how important it is to understand that the way that we spend our money is like voting with our dollar. And as we spend, we're starting to see that spending in the right ways that are aligned with our values is bringing us more fulfillment, is bringing us more joy. We're spending because we're trying to mask certain emotions is bringing us more disconnection, more dissonance.
Sure. One of my favorite exercises that I like to do with clients, it's included in your workbook, but something I'd like to reference and explain further here as well, is this thing called financial resilience timeline. Sometimes you can do it for life in general, or you can have a Zoom micro look at financial milestones specifically. So the way it works, you draw a timeline with 5 years increments, and you plot on this timeline positive milestones that took place as well as negative milestones that took place, and you connect the dots so you can look at your life from a bird's eye view in order to identify any patterns, bring certain awarenesses, and it brings up so much into people in such a way. When I did it with clients recently, I had a client who mentioned, I noticed that in the timeline that I just looked at, the times where I made more money were also the times that I was more stressed, that I had less money left over for me, and I was more resentful, even though she was not aware of that, and she thought the answer to her problem is just making more money. And she recognized from this timeline is the times where she was the happiest was actually times where she was like backpacking and traveling with like almost very, very, very minimal budget, and she wasn't making much. She was a student at the time, drowning in student debt. And that really puts things in perspective for her, because she was in a pivotal time in her career thinking, I just need to make more money to achieve more happiness or stability or just some security in my life. And meanwhile, when she looked at her financial resilience timeline, the story that the data showed was the reverse of what she was operating based on. So the financial resilience timeline also brings awareness to how did we navigate financial challenges in the past? What happened in significant financial moments, which also brings awareness to why we may be harboring certain emotions that are impacting our decisions today. Some of the experiences may not have been firsthand, the ones we personally were engaged in, particularly in the first 20 years of our life. We may have grown in certain environments where we absorbed the messaging and what we grew up witnessing, what was happening in our surrounding, from family to culture to even media. And all these messages and how they play a role in how we now show up as far as the attitudes we have around money, the thoughts, the emotions, the belief systems. They're all very important things to kind of consider when we try to understand the behaviors we're engaged in today. And on that note, behavioral finance studies show that closing the emotional gap between women and financial advisors is really important to have women engaged in decision makings around their money. You already talked about the transfer of wealth into women. We always say that the future of wealth is women. And what we mean by that is the fact that they're going to be earning more money, they're going to be managing more money, there's going to be more decisions expected from them. So tell us a little bit more, Ree, about the work that you and I are doing to help support the financial advisors in the new economy to be able to navigate these upcoming changes that are happening.
Yeah, quite simply, I think it's about actually working with financial professionals, including financial advisors, and giving them a more holistic understanding of how emotions impact our decision making with money. So when we equip financial advisors or those in professional fields working with money, advising women and other clients, and we give them that knowledge and expertise so that instead of doing surface level financial planning, surface level budgeting, we're actually going to the deeper layers of understanding that most of us are making financial decisions based on underlying core emotions and subconscious beliefs that we may not have actually understood the correlation to.
When we have trauma-informed approaches, it really supports clients to open up, to really release some of the shame and guilt that is crippling when it comes to conversations like that, which ultimately leads to financial avoidance. And that's how we lure clients back into the offices, allow them to open up in safe spaces, gain their trust and confidence in our ability to support them as professionals towards what it is they would be benefited with towards their financial health. And what's important here to consider if you're listening to this is your role in being proactive in that. So yes, the industry and systemically we need to become better to support clients, but as a client yourself, the onus is on you. This is your financial health. So get the knowledge that you need, interview professionals to make sure you are choosing a trusted professional you can build a deep relationship with. And that particularly reminds me of a client that I was recently supporting who was very confused by which financial professional to go with. And she was debating between somebody who just felt that they know their stuff very well and are very knowledgeable, and somebody else who felt nicer and had a more relationship-centric approach to the conversation. And what I helped her understand is that both are key components that matter to her. It's not about choosing, do I choose somebody I like or do I choose somebody that's knowledgeable? Both are very important core metrics for women to trust in financial advisors. And I helped her understand that it's not asking too much to have both from a professional, and that you need to be very clear about what matters to you and take this onus to interview people and get them to earn their position as your financial advisor. You don't, this is an important relationship that you're building from
100%.
That is long term.
And I think that this comes back down to exactly what we're talking today about, values aligned. And it really is an important value for me in any relationship that I have, that I feel comfortable, that there's transparency, that there's openness, honesty. But I can assure you that there's been many times throughout my financial journey that I've gone to try to do the right thing. So trying to set myself up even with a financial advisor, and that seems to be the goal, as opposed to the piece around aligning that relationship with the values I hold in my other relationships. And so I've ended up in situations where I just thought I was making the right choice by getting an advisor and by starting a process. I didn't even ever think that I had the right to discern around how I felt in that relationship.
Yeah. The authority bias is very applicable here, because sometimes we just put a certain weight on authority, in this case the financial advisor. Sometimes even when they're speaking in certain jargons that we don't understand, we just completely withdraw and just feel like we need to give up and outsource our power to that particular professional, when what we're encouraging you here is that power is always within you, in such a way where you bring forward what matters to you, you make sure that that professional understands and respects that, you create the boundary that's important, and you also ask the questions that matter, and make sure that that person's values are also aligned with you. So you can ask them about their investment philosophy, you can ask them about the values that drive their career, why they chose to be a financial advisor, and whatever else matters to you? Clients used to ask me that, like, why are you a financial advisor? And what would you do in a situation where my funds are losing and I'm feeling very emotional about it? Like, they would ask me things like that to know how I would treat them in these particular situations. And as women, it's very important for us to feel that we have a trusted, safe environment for our emotions to be recognized, seen, witnessed, and not shamed.
And I think the big piece that, and I know I've been definitely someone who's done this in the past, is I'm spending my emotions instead of actually feeling my emotion. I think for me, that's meant over, years in my life where there's been a lot of stress, there's been a lot of uncertainty in my life. I have, instead of dealing with that stress and uncertainty, I've tried to buy more, hire more, do more in terms of output, trying to create more so that I don't have to feel the disconnection that's happening inside. And I really want to highlight that I'm outing myself here, but this has been such a common narrative within the community at Conscious Economics, speaking to so many women, that we are at a space where many of us are earning more than we ever have in generations past. Mm-hmm. The circumstance of, female breadwinner in the household is on the rise here in Canada. And so we have more spending power, but are we spending it in the ways that are truly aligned with the values of us trying to create stability and structure and well-being for ourselves and our family, buying back our time so that we can have more time with the people that we love? Or are we getting sucked into this culture of do, go, faster, faster, faster. And with all of that comes the impulse of needing to spend in order not to feel. This even came down to spending on chocolate, spending on candy, spending on things that I was eating instead of just feeling the emotion.
Sure. Similar to what I was sharing before, that this client recognized when she was doing her pattern recognition through her timeline, is the more money she made, the more stress she had and the less happiness yielded from the whole experience, versus her unconscious belief that more money means more happiness. Exactly. So it's important sometimes to reflect on, like, what has our life experiences shown us, taught us about what matters, about what we value, so that we can make sure that we're proactive in making sure that the decisions we make as far as how we make money, how we manage it, how we invest it, how we spend it, it's all reflection as far as who we are as people. Money is a reflection of the relationship we have with ourselves. And it's important to have that inventory across the board, like I said, from the way it enters into the way it exits our life.
So as we come to the conclusion of this mini masterclass, we want you to know that there are a handful of resources that you can actually walk yourself through some of these activities and exercises so you can start to understand what your personal values are. And then from that space, you can start to decide how you want to spend your money. The other important thing to recognize is just what we've been saying, emotions do drive financial decision making. So now that we understand that, how can we start to manage those emotions so that we can make aligned purchasing decisions and we can stick to our goals? Mm-hmm. So what are some of those key points and takeaways of how we can do that?
So emotional processing is a big part of this process, as we know. The first step is becoming aware of our emotions and normalizing having them. So similar to financial literacy, emotional literacy is equally important. There's one of our tools, which we'll include in the workbook, is an emotional wheel that gives you access to all the different ranges of emotions. Sometimes we recognize emotions like happy, sad, angry, which are generic terms, but we really zoom into what exactly am I feeling below the anger, below the happiness, below the grief, and we get really specific in our ability to name our emotions. That in itself is a very freeing exercise because it helps us feel seen within our own self. And now that we understand what the emotion is, we're able to give ourselves time to feel it, to experience it, to express it. You and I are very big on what that looks like, and we actually have our own emotional regulation sessions where sometimes you talk even about setting a timer for 30 minutes and really going deeply into the emotion, knowing how it shows up in your body and expressing it through movement, through audible sound, or journaling, or dancing it out, all these different ways to just allow the emotions to be processed outside your body. Because if they're not, they're gonna latch onto dysfunctional behaviors like food and money and all these different ways in how they then cope, how we cope with them. So finding ways to express emotions is really, really powerful and important part of this.
It's healthy for your relationships and every other aspect of your life. And it's something that as a society, we're underdeveloped in this particular skill. And so this is showing up in poor financial decision making, and there is a direct link.
And the quickest one I would say aside from that is learning certain breath techniques that are easy. The reason I love breath work is because you can literally use it anywhere, anytime without anyone noticing. You could be in the store being very much tempted by a specific sale and just practice some breathing techniques to really get into your body and check in if this particular purchase is in resonance. That is something that you can do anywhere, whether you're online shopping, whether you're physically shopping in a store, whether you're in a conversation with somebody, your boss negotiating your salary, whether you're, in any situation you can possibly imagine, your breath is along with you. So 2 key breaths that I really like around that. One is called box breathing, where you breathe in for 4, pause for 4, breathe out for 4, pause for 4. So you're literally creating a box, and that just helps your system slow down and be regulated. And the reason it's really, really powerful tool is because our systems are regulated. When our systems are regulated, it's reminding us that we are safe, because sometimes impulsive decisions happen when we're in a flight or fight response. So reminding our body that we are safe and we are in control helps us make more rational decisions. And the other breath that I really enjoy is called extended exhale, where I inhale for 5 and exhale for 10. You can explore what ratio works for you, but the idea is to exhale double the amount you inhale, sometimes 4-8, sometimes 5-10, whatever works best for your system. You have to try it out, but it really helps you again slow down and get back into your body in that moment that you need it.
I also think that as we start to construct a financial plan, as we start to create a budget that we actually want to stick to, it's important to kind of recategorize some of those basic categories that just don't really speak to us anymore. So for me personally, even though it sounds like it's the right thing to do, saving for retirement doesn't really float my boat. Thinking about when do I want to get to a stage in my life, and I don't picture myself as like in my 60s, and I picture when, and maybe even, in the next couple of years, in my 40s, I'd like to have a freedom year.
Yeah.
And so what does that freedom year look like for me? And what does that mean?
A really powerful example on that, I was helping a client. She was having so much shame and debt in the debt that she carries and guilt around it. And all she looked at was like credit card debt, line of credit debt, remortgage because she refinanced. And then she realized through our work together that all these decisions were made in a time where she was still coping with trauma. And now we renamed her debt to my healing fund in such a way that allowed her to really just drop the shame she carries around it, recognizing that this is what I needed to heal from the trauma. And now I'm calling it my healing fund. And now there's actually excitement and joy to pay money towards it versus the shame and guilt that made me want to look the other way and just commit to like bare minimum payments.
100%.
So renaming these categories and infusing your values in it, both in the ones you forecast for the future, like retirement versus freedom, also the ones that are existing, the present ones, like mortgage. I hate looking at my cash flow budget and seeing the word mortgage. Taxes is another one. Student loans is another one. All these different categories just hold certain level of connotation and heaviness. So reclaim and repurpose and infuse creativity and joy into how you do your budget, not just in how you rename them, but make it colorful, bring images, like make it a document that you feel calm to look at. Sometimes I'll look at clients' budgets and I'm like, just looking at it makes me like freeze up because of the colors you chose, like bright red to suggest danger when there's a deficit. Like we can change all these things. It doesn't have to be a black and white Excel sheet that's boring. Make it colorful and fun and infuse your creativity and personality into that in such a way that becomes more inviting.
100%.